A 15-year-old boy breaks into a house with his friends. Police arrive. A shootout happens. One of the boys is shot and killed. By the police. But here's the twist. The boy who survived? He was convicted of murder. For a death caused by the police. And he's serving 30 years in prison for it. This isn't a hypothetical. This is the real story of LaKeith Smith. A teenager from Alabama whose case has sparked nationwide outrage and raised serious questions about America's justice system. Because LaKeith didn't pull the trigger, a police officer did, but LaKeith is the one behind bars. Before we dive into one of the most controversial cases in recent American history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the American Shadow family. This case is still ongoing. As recently as April 2025, just last month, LaKeith was back in court fighting for his freedom. Drop your state in the comments below. Let's talk about this together. This is the story of LaKeith Smith and the law that put him in prison for a murder he didn't commit. February 23, 2015, Millbrook, Alabama, a small town just north of Montgomery. LaKeith Antoine Smith was 15 years old. He was a black teenager from a struggling neighborhood. He had gotten into trouble before. Nothing serious. Just typical teenage stuff. But on this night, LaKeith made a decision that would change his life forever. He and 4 other teenagers decided to go on a crime spree. They broke into homes. They stole things. Electronics. Money. Whatever they could find. It was stupid. It was reckless. It was criminal. But it was also the kind of thing that happens in neighborhoods where kids have nothing to do and no opportunities. For 48 hours, LaKeith and his friends burglarized homes in the Millbrook area. They thought they were getting away with it. They thought no one would notice. But someone did. On the night of February 23rd, a neighbor saw the group of teenagers breaking into an unoccupied house. The neighbor called 911. Police were dispatched immediately. Millbrook police officers arrived at the scene. They surrounded the house. The teenagers inside heard them coming, and they panicked. According to police reports, 2 of the boys came out of the backyard. One of them was 16-year-old Adante Washington. Police say Adante was holding a gun. Police say he pointed it at officers. And police say they had no choice but to shoot. Adante Washington was shot 4 times. He was hit in the neck, among other places. He died at the scene. He was 16 years old. LaKeith Smith and the other surviving teenagers were arrested. They were all charged with burglary, theft, and something else. Something that would shock the nation. Felony murder. Felony murder. It's a law that exists in most states. The basic idea is this. If you commit a felony, like robbery or burglary, and someone dies during the commission of that crime, you can be charged with murder. Even if you didn't kill anyone. Even if someone else pulled the trigger. Even if the police pulled the trigger. The theory behind the law is that if you commit a dangerous felony, you set in motion a chain of events that leads to death, and therefore, you're responsible for that death. It doesn't matter who actually killed the person. You're guilty of murder. In LaKeith Smith's case, the logic went like this. LaKeith participated in a burglary. The burglary caused police to respond. Police shot and killed Adante Washington. Therefore, LaKeith is responsible for Adante's death. Therefore, LaKeith committed murder. LaKeith was 15 years old. He didn't have a gun. There's no evidence he ever fired a weapon. He didn't shoot Adante. A police officer did. But under Alabama's felony murder law, that didn't matter. LaKeith was charged with murder. The case went to trial. LaKeith's public defender argued that the law was being misapplied, that it was unjust to charge a teenager with murder when he didn't kill anyone, when in fact the person who pulled the trigger was a law enforcement officer acting in self-defense. But the prosecution disagreed. They said LaKeith set the events in motion, that if he hadn't been burglarizing homes, police wouldn't have been called. Adante wouldn't have been shot. Therefore, LaKeith was responsible. The jury agreed. In March 2018, when LaKeith was 19 years old, he was convicted of felony murder, along with burglary and theft charges. He was also convicted of murder for the death of Adante Washington, his friend, his accomplice, the boy who was killed by police. The judge sentenced LaKeith to 65 years in prison. 65 years. For a crime he didn't commit. For a death caused by someone else. LaKeith's mother, LaKeith Smith, was devastated. She told reporters her son shouldn't have been with those boys. He shouldn't have been burglarizing homes. But he also shouldn't be serving a 65-year sentence for a murder he didn't commit. Civil rights organizations were outraged. The ACLU called the case a perfect example of everything wrong with the American criminal justice system. They pointed to several issues. First, the felony murder rule itself. The ACLU argued that holding someone responsible for a death they didn't cause is fundamentally unjust, especially when the person who did cause the death, the police officer, was cleared of any wrongdoing. Second, LaKeith was tried as an adult. He was 15 when the crime occurred, but Alabama law allowed him to be tried in adult court and sentenced as an adult. For many, this was a failure of the juvenile justice system. Third, LaKeith is black, and the felony murder rule disproportionately affects black youth. Studies show that black defendants are far more likely to be charged with felony murder than white defendants. They're far more likely to receive harsh sentences, and they're far more likely to be tried as adults. LaKeith's case became a national story. News outlets covered it. Activists rallied around him. Petitions were created calling for his release. People across the country were asking the same question: how is this justice? But LaKeith remained in prison, serving his 65-year sentence in a maximum security facility. He was 20 years old, and according to his sentence, he wouldn't be eligible for release until he was in his 80s. Then, in March 2023, something changed. LaKeith's attorneys filed for resentencing. They argued that his original sentence was excessive, that it didn't account for his age at the time of the crime, that it violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. On March 22, 2023, Judge Sibley Reynolds agreed. He reduced LaKeith's sentence from 65 years to 30 years, with credit for time served, 30 years. Still a life-altering sentence. LaKeith, who was 24 at the time of resentencing, would now be eligible for release in his late 40s instead of his 80s. It was a small victory, but it was something. LaKeith's attorney, Jennifer Holton, told reporters they would continue to fight. She said, "We're going to keep pushing for those who didn't pull the trigger." She called the felony murder rule fundamentally unjust, and she vowed to work toward changing the law. But LaKeith's fight wasn't over. In April 2025, just last month, LaKeith was back in court. His attorneys filed for a new sentencing hearing. They argued that even 30 years was too much, that LaKeith deserves a second chance, that he's paid enough for his crime. As of now, no decision has been reached. The judge is considering the arguments. LaKeith remains in prison, and his case continues to spark debate across the country. The felony murder rule is controversial. Supporters say it holds people accountable for dangerous crimes, that if you commit a felony, you should be responsible for all consequences, including death. But critics say it's unjust, that it punishes people for crimes they didn't commit, that it creates absurd outcomes, like a 15-year-old serving decades in prison for a murder committed by police. Alabama isn't alone. 48 states have some form of the felony murder rule. But in recent years, several states have reformed their laws. California, for example, passed a law limiting who can be charged with felony murder. Now, you can only be charged if you were the actual killer, or if you directly aided the killing, or if you acted with reckless indifference to human life. Advocates in Alabama are pushing for similar reforms. They want to amend the state's proximate cause murder law. They want to make sure cases like LaKeith's don't happen again. But prosecutors are pushing back. They say the law is necessary, that it deters crime, that it holds criminals accountable. So where does that leave LaKeith Smith? He's now 25 years old. He's been in prison for 10 years. He's missed his entire young adulthood, his high school graduation, his 20s, his chance to build a life. And for what? For being a stupid 15-year-old who made a terrible decision, for burglarizing homes with his friends, for being present when a police officer shot and killed one of those friends. Is that justice? Is that fair? Or is it a system that punishes black teenagers more harshly than anyone else? A system that values punishment over rehabilitation? A system that destroys lives in the name of accountability? These are the questions LaKeith's case forces us to ask. and they're questions America needs to answer. The police officer who shot Adante Washington was never charged. He was cleared of any wrongdoing. The shooting was ruled justified. Adante, police said, pointed a gun at them. They had no choice but to shoot. But Adante can't tell his side of the story. He's dead. And LaKeith? LaKeith is alive, but he's paying the price for Adante's death, even though he didn't kill him. That's the reality of the felony murder rule. That's the reality of LaKeith Smith's life. Thank you for watching American Shadow. This case is still ongoing. LaKeith's legal team is still fighting, and the debate over the felony murder rule continues. What do you think? Is LaKeith's sentence just, or is it a miscarriage of justice? Drop your state and your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our stories. LaKeith Smith was 15 years old when his life changed forever. He made a terrible choice. But does he deserve to spend 30 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit? That's for you to decide. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, justice isn't always black and white. Sometimes it's just broken.